εκείνη την περίοδο, αλλά την ίδια στιγμή είχε πάρα πολύ ενδιαφέρον να προσπαθήσουμε να τα πιάσουμε από μια σκοπιά κινηματογραφική και να δούμε πώς μπορούν αυτά τα δύο πεδία να συνεργαστούν παρέα. Η πρακτική έρευνα στο κινηματογράφο, τώρα θα δείτε ένα πρακτικό αποτέλεσμα που είναι το ντοκιμαντέρ που κάναμε. Θα μιλήσει και ο καθηγητής Erik Knudsen σε λίγο σχετικά με αυτό. Και πηγαίνοντας κατευθείαν σε αυτό, θα το γυρίσω λίγο στα αγγλικά για να μας καταλάβει, είναι μέσω Zoom. So, Erik Knudsen is an emeritus professor in the University of Central Lancashire, and we're very happy to have you here today to talk to us about what I briefly discussed in the beginning, the coexistence, the multidisciplinary approach of film practice research and political sciences, or in general, about different fields. Erik Knudsen is a professor of media and film practice, is one of the first people in UK that deal with this project, and I was very happy to have him as a PhD supervisor, and now a very close colleague. Erik, thank you very much for being here today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yakos. I'm very pleased to be joining you, even if it's only virtually. And I'm sure you guys are enjoying a lot better weather than we are here in the UK, where we are living under storms and so on. So thank you very much. I thought I would just spend 10 minutes very briefly outlining some of the key, I suppose, developments that are happening around practice-based research around film and how we're engaging with the wider kind of picture and the impact that then has on the type of research that we might do in filmmaking. And in that sense, I'm going to focus on the question of impact, because that's a very, very important part of what's happening in the UK at the moment in terms of research funding, not just in the sciences, but across the arts and humanities as well. So as Iakavos was saying, I've been involved in practice-based research in the UK for at least 35 years now, and we've seen a lot of developments happening in the academy around creative practice research. And part of this is to do with the fact that government has recognized the fact that creative industries accounts for about 6.5% of the gross domestic product of the country. And just to give you a comparison, that's over 6 times the size of agriculture. And so there is a recognition that the creative industries provides a very, very significant part of the economy, and it's a very important part of employment that's going on, and so on. And consequently, there has been a greater and greater interest in the research activity in the creative industries. And that obviously also includes software engineering and so on. And a lot of that revolves around, that funding revolves around impact. So everybody here in the UK is talking about impact. And one of the challenges, of course, we have in the arts is how do we demonstrate and evidence the fact that our research has impact? And I will, as a former faculty director of research overseeing research across the arts and humanities in my university, I would often end up in meetings with engineers, scientists, medical people, who can very, very quickly point to key impacts, like keeping people alive. But I'd have to go in and make the argument, I'd often joke with them that, yes, you guys can build bridges and build shelters and create medical treatments for people, and you can keep people alive. But in a sense, what is the point of keeping people alive if there's no meaning in their life? So we in the arts and humanities play a huge role, I think, in facilitating and engaging with these aspects of human experience that are equally critical. And one of our challenges is how do we, as creative artists, engage in some of these grand challenges that the people in the medical sciences and I assume in the social sciences and so on are engaged with. And we then might turn to something like, in my own work and work that I've been engaged with together with Iakavos, we, for example, be looking at ways in which we can engage in a transdisciplinary and in an interdisciplinary sense with some of the grand challenges that the United Nations has identified. So the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, have been of particular interest in the UK, and the way that we work have developed some projects around film. And I suppose one of the most obvious ways, film can be many different things. We can do research into film practice itself and the impact that that'll have on film storytelling, for example, and various working practices. Or we can look at exploring film as a dissemination tool for other research disciplines. But I think what's been of particular interest, I think, is the work that we've been able to do around participatory filmmaking. So this is really about how we engage in a transdisciplinary way with colleagues in other disciplines to bring to bear some of the processes and techniques and creative practices that we are engaged with, and how can they play a role in a collaborative sense to help others to interrogate certain issues and themes and problems. And we have, for example, developed a project engaging with a number of different disciplines called Story Lab, where we have been engaging with archaeologists, with food scientists, with police and legal people, as well as ethnography and I suppose anthropology as well. And I just thought I'd give you a couple of examples of the kind of things that we're doing. And we've developed a kind of methodology that we call ethnomediaology, which really is borrowing, this is the interdisciplinary aspect of what we're doing. We're borrowing methodologies from music and from anthropology and actually fashioning it into work that we are doing within film. So, for example, the kind of targets we're looking to address in terms of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are things like addressing inequalities, both within countries and communities and between countries and communities. We look at things like quality education, how to develop strategies for quality education. And very importantly, of course, we look at the whole employment issues around employment and meaningful work, how to help create and sustain meaningful work for people. So these are particular targets that we can say, okay, how do we work as filmmakers with colleagues who are working in anthropology and ethnography and in the political realm to address some of these questions. So for example, the Story Lab project we did in Colombia, we worked very closely with colleagues, not only colleagues in film, but colleagues in psychology and social work to try and see how we could create some participatory mentor-driven workshops in order to engage different communities that had been isolated from the peace and reconciliation process that's been going on in Colombia for a few years, to try and address the long-standing civil war and the isolation that has been created in certain communities as part of that war. So now they have a situation where there are communities that have been isolated for many, many years, who have not been recognized by government and who are not part of this peace and reconciliation process. So how can we as filmmakers engage with these communities to help them evolve and develop their own film practices as part of a method of them engaging with the wider debate around peace and reconciliation, around policy developments, and so on. So we've done a number of projects in Colombia where we've explored this. And one of the things, of course, we have to do is to try and find methods of measuring the impact of what we're doing. So we have various approaches to that in terms of documenting individual stories and cases of people and how the workshops have impacted their lives, as well as looking at some statistics in terms of how people have subsequently, for example, gone on to do certain types of jobs. We did some work with archaeologists. This is where Jakobos comes in with our archaeology colleagues in California, where, again, they were doing an archaeology project involving a particular Native American tribe called the Tejon. And they were having problems engaging that community in the archaeology project and in their own history and in their own landscape. And we, as a team of filmmakers, were able to come in and collaborate with them and develop some story lab workshops, some ethnomediology-driven workshops, where we use this as a method of exploring ourselves, different ways of engaging people in storytelling, different ways of in particular, getting young people to engage in their history and show an interest in their history. And one of the interesting byproducts of a project like that, of course, is that we could document the fact that we helped to create intergenerational conversations between the older Tejon tribe members and the younger Tejon tribe members through an engagement with the archaeology project that was happening and through a participatory filmmaking engagement. And that turned out to be a significant success. And we did 2 years of workshops around that. Another example of sort of participatory work that maybe directly influences some of the themes that you might be dealing with at this conference is one of my PhD students went to Papua in Indonesia to work with women who are either wives, sisters, or mothers of men who had been killed in the civil war there. And again, there was a peace and reconciliation process going on, but these women were completely excluded from that process. So her work was very much about how to create a sustainable context in which these women could make their own films about their experiences and about their ideas about peace and reconciliation as a method of trying to engage them in the peace and reconciliation process. So this is in a sense about literacy. It's about empowerment. It's about enablement, but very much around the film practice, and very importantly in this particular project, how to create a film practice that once the researchers had been removed from the situation, it would sustain itself and help to get those women engaged in participatory or in the peace and reconciliation process. We've also been involved with, for example, a big project that our policing and law teams are involved with the EU, where the EU had some funding for trying to understand people's changing relationship with their institutions, some of the key institutions within the EU. And this particular project was about communities' relationship to policing. And again, what we find is that a lot of these people in different disciplines are very interested in what we can do as filmmakers, and particularly participatory filmmaking, as a means of them trying to find new methods to understand what people's relationship is, in this case with the police and policing, and how policing is impacting on the communities and what people's attitudes are and so on. Again, there we were able to design some participatory workshops that would enable people and both police and the communities they serve to participate in some joint workshops around exploring some storytelling around some of the issues and themes that they're confronted with. Again, another way of creating data, another way of creating a different perspective on a problem. And we find that we get great excitement and great interest in these approaches. So these are just a couple of very brief examples of some of the projects that one might engage with from a participatory point of view. In terms of filmmaking. We replicate this as well. I also supervise people, for example, students who are doing photography PhDs, where again, we often do participatory work, for example, with businesses, photographers, and how they work with artisan businesses in a changing high street, in a changing economic situation where some high streets are dying. How do artisan traders respond to that using photography as one of the methods to reconceptualize how they sell their goods and how they reach their markets and so on. So we've done some research around that, again, where photography is a significant part of the methodology involved. So basically, we're looking at all sorts of interesting ways of engaging with people. So I distinguish between transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary in the sense that transdisciplinary is usually where we work with people in different disciplines to solve and address particular problems, and we then design a kind of collaborative framework around our different research interests. And interdisciplinary, I think of very much as where we borrow, which is what we've done, for example, with ethnometeorology, where we might work within a discipline, but we are borrowing and appropriating a number of methodologies from other disciplines that we are then adapting and evolving to suit our purposes. So there's a lot of very interesting ways in which one can work together. And I know that in the sciences, in my university, in the sciences, they're very, very interested in working with artists, partly because I think, to be blunt about it, they get a bit stuck in some of their methodologies. And those methodologies are perhaps not yielding the kind of new insights or new perspectives that they're hoping for. And bringing in artists, including filmmakers, is another way in which they can explore different methods of interrogating some of the issues that they're interested in. And from the creative point of view, we can explore different ways in which film can play a role. The idea of film just being an entertainment industry is a long dead idea, because now that the film has been democratized, anybody can make a film, and we can distribute and disseminate in all sorts of different ways. Now we're using film in all sorts of different ways, all sorts of different contexts, and that includes all sorts of different research contexts. So I think it's a very interesting and exciting time for transdisciplinary collaboration involving film in particular, but the creative arts in general. So that's basically it. And I think one of the things I wanted to emphasize around focusing on impact is and I mentioned the research agenda in the UK is very much focused on impact. And I'll have a lot of my colleagues complaining about this. Right from the historians to the philosophers, right through to the fine artists, saying, how do we justify what we're doing, and how do we measure impact, and how do we articulate that impact? And I think that's the current challenge for us in the creative arts at the moment. And one of the obvious ways of doing that is to collaborate with other disciplines, addressing specific issues and challenges that can be recognized, and then having a very open mind about how one captures and evidences that impact, because that can both be socioeconomic, it can be policy-driven impacts, it can be very personal impacts on individual people, and there's a whole range of different impacts. So it's about learning how we can articulate and understand the impact that we're having as creative practitioners in the way that we then collaborate with our colleagues in other disciplines. So, Iacovos, that was just a sort of quick summary. I don't know whether, there are any questions, or whether, you wanted me to expand on anything in particular.
Thank you very much, Erik, for that. I think it was great, and we're gonna move to the documentary. Thank you very much for being here with us today, and
it was a pleasure
discussing these issues.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. So I hope everybody has a wonderful time.
Just one question from Mr. Seferiadis, from Professor Seferiadis.
Where should I come? Hello, Professor Knudsen.
Hello, wonderful to see.
It's a pleasure. Fortunately, we were having some trouble with, our cameras here.
Yes.
They're understuffed, you see.
Yeah, okay.
Enjoyed very much your presentation. I think it fits perfectly with what we've been trying to do here, establish an interdisciplinary rapport between the two fields.
Yeah.
Our hope is that we too are having some impact in terms of the questions we raise, the conclusions we draw. It's not always the case, as you well know. And film can help us Definitely what you said about film suggesting new ways for us to recast some questions and some approaches, and sort of helps us identify new areas where we can sort of interrogate them and raise different questions, because
Exactly.
to raise important questions before anything else. About the complaints of your colleagues about impact, I tend to agree, not because I'm not in favor of acquiring an impact, but because of the ways nowadays impact is being measured. You know, it's very unfairly structured, and it sort of.
But my point, sorry, is that we need to engage and be part of shaping the definitions of how the establishment is defining impact.
Absolutely, absolutely. But that too is a political struggle.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. If there is not another question, we can proceed. Is there any other question? Maybe? Let's look here. A promise?
Translate have the English subtitles.
No, we're going to send you the film with the English subtitles, Eric.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay, well,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being here.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.